Thank you. Thank you, Don, for introducing me. My name is Ripon Ray, founder of UCAN, Universal Credit Action Network. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? What does it look like on the screen? All good?
All good.
Yeah? Yeah, the reason I decided to give a talk on fuel poverty, it's partly because I guess my advice background is in debt advice. So on the back of my mind, it's always been the case that any increase in cost in fuel, inevitably it will get trickled down on communities who are already struggling. So that's one thing really, but also it has a personal dimension to it. Now, this is a letter I personally received from my fuel supplier not long ago, I would say less than a month ago. And the letter explicitly says that from 1st of October, my bill is going to go up by 12%. So if my bill is going to go up by 12% and I'm working and have, I suppose, slightly comfortable job, what if someone is on the breadline? How would that person and that household will feel? That was really my biggest concern, and that's really the main reason I decided to think about fuel poverty. So it's about personal experience as well as from my professional experience. Being a very simple person as I am, and try to have a grassroots connection in the community. What I mean by community here, some of them may have language issues, some of them may have passed their GCSE, but vocabulary may not be that broad. I thought, how can I reach out to that community? And that's why I had to start with the basics. And one of the basic thing is what is fuel? And I think we all take it for granted what it is, but when you actually delve deep into it, I had to make it as plain, as simple as possible, as though I'm feeding a 10-year-old. So that's why fuel is a material that is used to burn and to produce heat or power. Fuel is a compound which has stored energy, and it burns in combustion with oxygen, which gives out heat energy and is called, which I don't even know the word myself, but I'm using it anyway, exothermic reaction. So there is chain reaction with two substances with oxygen, then you get fuel. And anyone who has done science for GCSE will know how it works, and you'll remember the Bunsen burner, and that's what it is really. So and Don did point out in terms of the main source, and I'm just repeating it again, and that is the main source of fuel is fossil fuel. Another word, fuel, that is not renewable. So then it takes me to the difference between renewable and non-renewable. We all take it for granted, but I can tell you in the East End of London, many people don't know it because they don't tangibly come across things to do with renewable, and you might get more of those things the moment you go out of London in the countryside and in villages. But when it comes to local council estates, you may not find it. So, non-renewable renewable energy is fuel, fossil fuel, that can never be replaced. Once you've used it, it's gone. And renewable energies, where we talk about replacing it either through wind or solar, that's what we mean. And fossil fuels are energy sources such as crude oil, coal, and the gas that we get from the underground that are formed millions and millions of years ago from the remains of dead organisms such as plants. And of course, for coal, pretty much the same. Crude oil and gas will form from, again, dead plants as well as marine organisms. So in a very basic, simple way to make sure the message is there without complicating anything at all. Now, I know Don mentioned it briefly, but I might as well just go and say it again. As you can see by looking at it over there, the pie chart shows in 2015, we've got a long way to go, I'm afraid. Long way, I mean, we only have 9% that is renewable, whilst if you want to say 90% plus is still non-renewable. So in other words, we're using fuel that we're burning, but we can never ever replace. So in other words, the more we use it, there's no way for us to turn back the clock. Now here we are, in terms of the reason for, Don is right, and I loved hearing what he said. And I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, in a sense of what happened currently. In a sense of marketization, absolutely. In a sense of selling things off, absolutely. In a sense of capacity of storage, definitely. But in current times, when you look at the basics of economics, realize it is boiling down to simple factors: supply and demand. Cold water in winter in Europe largely put pressure on supplies, and as a result, stored gas levels are much lower than normal. There's been an increase in demand, and Don showed how and what is happening in China. We saw that graph going miles compared to other nations. That's what it is. When you have a huge nation like China, where a nation can form a major city like London within a few years, it needs energy. So it's using and utilizing the energy to service, and someone has said in this room, service the world. One Britain was the workshop of the world. Now he has turned, and I'm afraid we have to accept the tiger nations are now leading the waves, not Britain. So yes, there's been an increase in demand from Asia, also reliance, and the sad thing is Britain doesn't really produce much. It relies on other nations for its fuel, from Norway, from Belgium, from Netherlands, and let's not forget the Cold War and Russia. Russia is still there saying, do you want to trade with us? We have fuel. So in terms of making it really to the basics, and that is what is going on with you and in your pocket and your tariffs. In August 2020, you could have easily got 120 fuel suppliers providing you fuel for a year, on an average less than £1,000 for a medium-sized family. If you shift forward for another year, sadly, there is not even a single company can provide you that service anymore, because many companies have gone bust. The cost of wholesale price has gone up, and what we have seen in November 2021, we have seen 21 suppliers, and as we speak, more to follow, have gone bust in Britain. So 21 suppliers within 3 months have gone down under. So therefore, over 2,000 people in Britain are affected by it. I'm not sure if any of you have received a letter saying you're being transferred to a new supplier, and it's all been done without you knowing it by Ofgem, the regulator of fuel, and that's what it is. We are seeing suppliers changing because we need energy. It may not impact you when it comes to transition, only few who have been, but the reality is your fuel no doubt will, cost of fuel will no doubt will go up, and there is no way turning back, and suppliers have made it quite clear. However, when there is a change, you will continue to receive fuel. You don't switch suppliers because you can't. If the moment you do that, it affects the relationship and the transition, because obviously from old to new is done by default with Ofgem. And if you move to another one straight away, you find yourself in complication because your data, your personal data, could not be found by the new supplier. So you may find yourself in complication. So the advice is stay, and the new supplier will by default will put you on their variable tariffs, which is capped by Ofgem. I will talk briefly about it a bit later. And the supplier will contact you within a week and put you, as I said, in their deemed variable tariff. And of course, any credit that you will have in your previous account with the supplier, it will also be transferred to the new one. The only thing that cannot happen though is that if you're in debt with the supplier, the debt will not be passed to the new one, is because the administrator is dealing with it under liquidation and insolvency laws. So therefore, it's the administrator who will get in touch with you to talk to you about the debt that you owe. But obviously, that's something that you need to worry about it yet. I'll cover it a bit later. So in terms of switch, now you and I know for last decade and a half, and Martin Lewis, even though you may have heard of, he will go on about switch, 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 switch. I'm afraid the days of switching are now over, because as I've shown you at the beginning, I'm afraid there is no competition in the market. When there is competition, there is competition for customers, competition for gas. You could have that. The days are now over. Now it's where the regulator is thrusting suppliers upon you, because the supplier has monopoly over the area. So the bigger ones are pretty much in control, rather than the smaller ones that in the past were able to negotiate with I suppose the nation's concerns or the provider concern in the past, and they will buy on the wholesale. So yes, there we are. Straight away you will see, don't switch straight away. However, if you can later on then see through looking into various things, and I put 4 for you, here we are. These are the ones that are verified by the regulator, and the reason I'm emphasizing on those is because if something goes wrong, if complaints that you need to make, if they're not verified by the regulator, you will find yourself in a situation where you're out of pocket in theory as well as potentially in practice. So here we are. We've talked about wider in terms of what's going on in the wider market. We talked about in the sense of how the regulator is responding to the supplier and how consumers get the supplies. But of course, we mustn't forget, ultimately we're here to talk about poverty. We talked about fuel. We talked about the industry. Now, where does the poverty fit in? I'm afraid, obviously, if you look at academics, and others will say it's simple. In fact, Scotland is happy. Scottish government is happy with this definition. If you spend more than 10% of your income on fuel, you are pretty much in poverty. But Kay, who's standing on my left, she said, don't even bother saying that. Make it even more simple than that. And do you know what? I agree with Kay, because she ultimately, when we talk about poverty, it is about whether to pay your rent, whether to pay for your electricity or fuel, or whether to eat. So we are talking about whether to eat